if you have an old Mac. With the OpenCore legacy patcher, you could install newer macOS versions up until macOS Sequoia. But the question is, does it really make sense to install Sequoia, for instance, on 15-year-old hardware like this iMac from 2011? Does it still feel good and snappy? Do I want to work with that? Or does it slow the Mac down because it's such old hardware that it takes forever to boot, to open a spreadsheet, to use Safari, to open a web page, and so like everyday tasks? Is it still capable of handling Sequoia? And the second question is, if it's not, what macOS version is the best version that I can use that is still snappy and okay for everyday work, depending on the age of your unsupported Mac? And so I resetted all of my Mac models starting 2011 up until 2018 to the latest official macOS, and then upgraded all of them step by step through all macOS versions. And you can just pick your Mac model year and find out what is the best unsupported macOS for your Mac. Welcome to Jesse's Flying. This video is a little bit different from all the others because we are not doing benchmarking and everything. We're doing like real world benchmarking, okay? So what is the reason? If you have old hardware, an old Mac, and you could install Sequoia, but you're wondering, should I do that? Does it feel okay with working speed, or do I just wait for every action and I get the rainbow ball and everything and it just not feels right? And I'd like to give you an idea how good different Mac models from different years can handle different macOS versions. Why not Tahoe? Because the OpenCore legacy patcher still does not support macOS Tahoe. If you want to know more about that issue, here's my video about that. So what are everyday benchmarks? For instance, if I switch on this iMac, how long does it take to boot up until you see the login screen and you can enter your password? Does this increase, and if yes, how much, with installing a newer unsupported macOS? And obviously the 5-second wait with the OpenCore legacy patcher, I just subtracted that because that would be unfair, right? And to check, for instance, for the very old Mac models, how much longer do you have to wait until you can use your Mac in everyday work? And second test was, when you enter your password, how long does it take to really boot up, to show the dock and the menu bar? How long does it take to be ready? Another test is, how long does the Mac take to start YouTube in Safari? It's no use to compare the different Mac models because they all have different Wi-Fi modules and so on, but to check, does it take longer with macOS Sequoia than it maybe take with the macOS Ventura? So you have another item about the feel. How fast does it open the Safari and the YouTube? A different thing I also tested was the speedometer. The speedometer is a test in the web browser that tests the handling, and I use the speedometer 2.0 because that works also with High Sierra. I know there are newer versions, but that test just runs 480 different browser tests. And I'd like to see, does this benchmark decrease with a newer macOS version, or does it stay the same? So the working speed of the Safari increases or decreases depending on the macOS version you install on your old Mac. And last but not least, there is a benchmark that's called Crossmark, and you can find it for free on the App Store in the basic version that I use. And that benchmark tries to measure like also everyday feel, everyday tasks. And it has the overall score, obviously, but it has like scores for productivity, creativity, and responsiveness. And you can see Here on my iMac, there are already two results, because one is the result before installing OpenCore on the official supported macOS, here Ventura, and one is afterwards. And I can tell you that already, it doesn't make any difference besides it boots longer. And the other thing, before I do all the benchmarking and all the tests, I check how long does the Mac take until the activity monitor shows more than 90% idle. But obviously, before I did that, I let every Mac sit for half an hour after I updated the macOS. So it can do all the indexing stuff it needs. And so if there's a lot of tasks running in the background, it also feels a little bit slow, sluggish, and not so very nice responding. And so the iMac here is about 85 to 90% with screen recording active. And I give you all the times and especially the increase in time. Comparing maybe Ventura to Sequoia, does it take longer until the Mac has done everything in the background, or does it even not reach 90%? So these are my tests, and now let me show you all the results. The first generation of Intel Core chips, that was called Nehalem, and that was presented in 2008. And this first generation in the version for a Xeon server processor went into the Mac Pro 4.1. I don't have such a model, but I have the next model, which was still first generation with the Intel Xeon Westmere CPU, and that went into the Mac Pro 5.1 from 2010 to 2012, and that was the version I tested here. I found one glitch, and that is the reason why you don't see any score here for the speedometer. That is the blue line in the graphics for macOS Ventura, because I got graphic glitches, especially in the dark mode, and the Safari won't load the speedometer and won't load YouTube. So I didn't have any time during all that testing to find out if it's only in the latest Ventura or is it something with the latest OpenCore legacy patcher, but I will definitely look into this. But if you have a look at the charts, you can see that there are 5 different lines with different colors. The first one is the speedometer. As I said, it's the blue line. That is the speed in Safari, and that increases with modern macOSs. And that is nearly in all other Macs also the case. Why? Because the Safari gets updated to the latest version that I used, that was 26.5, and obviously a modern browser can handle modern web pages better than an older one. Second is the red line, and that shows the seconds, the time you need to wait from switching the Mac on until you see the login and the password entering screen. And you can see I installed macOS Mojave, that was the latest official macOS with the updated graphics card, that had 42 seconds. Just installing OpenCore bumped that up to 57. So that is like 15 seconds longer due to the EFI injection and like OpenCore loading its drivers. This is already minus the 5 seconds that it shows the boot selector screen in the OpenCore screen. So I subtracted that. And so then with all other macOS versions, Big Sur, Monterey, Ventura, Sonoma, it really keeps about 57 and then it bumps up to 60. That's 3 seconds more. That's okay. But with Sequoia, there was another 5 seconds. So you need 65 seconds, more than a minute, when you switch it on until you can enter your password. The next is the yellow line. That is how long does it take from that password entering until it's above 90% idle. And you can see that was 15 seconds for Mojave, which was quite lightweight. 25, 20 seconds, and that is for all macOS versions. But with Sequoia, this time doubles. It goes from 20 to 40 seconds until the Mac is done with all the background tasks. And here you can see, and you will find that with nearly all other Macs, Sequoia adds so many background tasks and is so background heavy that even the 12-core server processor here in the Mac Pro just needs double the time to finish all the background tasks. The last line, or the green line actually, is the login time from hitting return after entering your password until the dock in the menu bar shows up, and that remains at 3 seconds up until Sequoia. That bumps up to 10 seconds. That's more than 3 times longer, 7 seconds longer, just until it shows the dock. Another strong indication that Sequoia adds a lot of background stuff and is very, very processor and memory hungry, and you will see that in other Macs. It really slows your old Macs down. And last but not least, the idle percentage. That is after everything background tasks are done, how much resources does the Mac have, and that is like 98, 97, and then 99% idle. So there's only 1% background activity when everything is done. So there's no change in here. On the right side, you can see the scores from the crossmark benchmark. The overall score, 591, 592, and so on, doesn't change a lot. Productivity is around 580. There's no big change. Creativity, this drops a little bit with Sequoia. And by the way, crossmark needs minimum of macOS Monterey. So that is why I have no results before macOS Monterey. And responsiveness is around 374, then 360, 370. So there's no really big change during all these macOS versions. So that brings me to the conclusion that for the Mac Pro 4.1, that is what I assume because it's quite similar, and for the Mac Pro 5.1, if you have a very low spec Mac, then I would recommend Sonoma. Or if it doesn't care about boot times, about getting ready times, then you definitely can run Sequoia, the latest version, as it's not slowing the Mac down. It just needs more time until it's ready. The second generation is called Sandy Bridge, and that was released in 2011. That is the processor, the CPU family that is in my iMac 2011. Here are the results of all my testing. As you can see, same as with the Mac Pro, the speedometer jumps up from Big Sur to Monterey and then to Sequoia because the Safari is getting newer and handling the web pages better. The cold boot times, so from switching it on to the password entering, that increases steadily, but from Sonoma to Sequoia, it bumps up from 48 to 64 seconds. So that's another 16 seconds more until you can enter your password. And the green line is the login time after entering the password until your dock and your menu bar shows up. Same here, it's around 3, 4, 5 seconds. Sonoma bumps it up from 5 to 10, but Sequoia bumps it up from 10 to 20. So if you add that together, it needs 84 seconds from switching it on until you can use it, until then you have the menu bar and the dock. And if you now have a look at the yellow line, that is the time it needs until it hits more than 90% idle. That's around 45, 35, and Sonoma actually is quite fast with the background tasks, only 30 seconds after entering your password, but that bumps up to 115 in macOS Sequoia. The background idle is about 96, 98, 97, so there's no big change, and you can see the crossmark benchmarks. Yeah, they're maybe a little bit decreasing, especially responsiveness with the Sandy Bridge second generation of Intel chips, I only can recommend macOS Ventura, or if you have a high spec, then you can run macOS Sonoma. So what else is the Sandy Bridge family besides my 2011 iMac? For instance, it's the MacBook Pro 2011 and the MacBook Air 2011. Be careful, there are versions of the MacBook Air 2011 that were only shipped with 2 GB of memory. Same is with the Mac Mini 2011. If you happen to have a version with 2 GB of memory, for the Mac Mini you can upgrade it, but for the MacBook Air you cannot. You only can reasonably run macOS 10.13 High Sierra, the latest official macOS version. Even Big Sur with OpenCore Legacy Patcher is no fun on a 2 GB of memory machine for the Sandy Bridge. Which brings me to the third generation, and the third generation is called Ivy Bridge. This third generation Ivy Bridge was also used in the server variant for the Mac Pro 2013. Same picture, as newer as Safari gets. You see the blue speedometer line, it's getting faster and faster. The scoring gets higher and higher. The idle percentage remains about 98 to 99%, but you can see the cold boot time goes from 27 to 38, going from Sonoma to Sequoia. The login time from 3 seconds until the dock shows up to 10 seconds, and also the time until it reaches 90% idle also goes up from 25 to 33. Benchmarks of ScoreMark, you can see that the creativity score really drops, the responsiveness score really drops down, and the overall score obviously then drops also down from Sonoma to Sequoia. If you can live with longer boot times, and if you have the higher spec trash can, the Mac Pro 2013, yes, you can run Sequoia, shouldn't be any big issue. But for the lower specs, or if you want it snappier and so on, I recommend Sonoma on this. And the same generation Ivy Bridge was also in my MacBook Pro 2012. And here it's a little bit less capable processor. It's not the Xeon server variant, and it has a mobile graphic card and not like the dual D300 or 500 or 700 in the Mac Pro. And here you can see, yes, the speedometer increases for the Safari scoring, but this drops then with Sequoia, because you can see all other times go up definitely. You go for the login, okay, from 28 to 45 already with Sonoma. So it also adds a little bit of boot time, and then to 48 with Sequoia. But the wait time after entering your password, the green line, bumps up from 4 to 5 seconds to 15 seconds in Sequoia. And then it needs, instead of like 35 seconds, 135 seconds until the MacBook Pro 2012 reaches 90% idle. If you look at the Crossmark scores, all scores go down with the newer macOSs, but there's a significant drop when you switch from Sonoma to Sequoia. And so for these Ivy Bridge generation, I can only recommend, if it's a lower spec, stay with maybe Ventura, and if it's a higher spec, use Sonoma. In the Ivy Bridge family, there is the iMac 2012, 2013, and also the MacBook Pro 2012, 2013, that is the one I tested. And you have the MacBook Air 2012 and the Mac Mini 2012. That's all Ivy Bridge generations. Next generation that comes afterwards was the Haswell generation, the fourth generation of the Intel chips. And this Haswell generation came with AVX2 instructions. And these AVX2 instructions were a prerequisite for macOS Ventura. For instance, my MacBook Air 2013 is such a Haswell generation. but the MacBook Air is a low spec. It only has 4 gigabytes of memory and a very slow processor, as the MacBook Air was more the lightweight MacBook. And if you have a look at the speedometer, that nearly remains the same. So even though the Safari gets newer and should be handling web pages better, the processor is just maxed out, the memory is maxed out, so there's no real speed increase. The boot times go up from about 39, 44 to 59 on Sequoia. The wait time for the dock and so on bump up from 4 seconds in Ventura to 10 in Sonoma and to 25 in Sequoia. And this really feels very slow when you increase the macOS. So what can I recommend here for the low spec? Absolutely stay with Ventura. And if you have a higher spec Haswell generation Mac, then you can go with Sonoma. For the Haswell family, that is the iMac 14 version, like 2013, 2014, and the iMac 15.1 here in this case from 2014, 2015. Same goes with the MacBook Pro 2013 and 14 and the MacBook Air 2013 and 14 that are all Haswell generation, that all have AVX2, and the MacBook Air was the one I tested on the low spec side. Same goes with the Mac Mini 2014 that is also Haswell family. Let's talk about the 5th generation that was called Broadwell and was released in 2015. This was my MacBook Pro 2015, and if you have a look at here, you see same picture as with the generation before. As soon as you go to Sequoia, all crossmark scores drop down significantly. Even the speedometer Safari benchmark drops with Sequoia, and you can see the boot times go up from 35 to 48, the wait times from 5 to 17 seconds. That's triple the time waiting until the dog shows up, and the time it needs to reach 90% idle from Ventura bumps up from 40 to 75, and Sonoma bumps up to a 200. That's more than 3 minutes that the MacBook Pro needs until it gets about 90% idle. The Skylake Broadwell family from 2015 is the iMac, and also the MacBook Pro 2015, that is Haswell Broadwell generation, depending on your specific model. Then you have the Broadwell generation of the MacBook Air 2015, 2017, and you have the regular MacBook that was reintroduced in 2015. But be careful, those MacBooks, they are Broadwell family, but they do have a very lightweight processor. So here, it doesn't matter if it's like a higher or lower spec, depending memory and so on. With the regular MacBook, I can only recommend macOS Sonoma due to this processor is so slow and so lightweight. Same goes with the 2016 MacBook that is already Skylake family, but also a very lightweight mobile processor that I can only recommend macOS Sonoma. Mid-2015, the 6th generation was released that was called Skylake, and for instance here, that was my MacBook Pro 2016. When you go to the benchmark scores, you can see the overall score and the productivity bumps up with macOS Sequoia, and the creativity goes down with macOS Sequoia. The speedometer just stays around the same scoring. It doesn't matter if it's Ventura, Sonoma, Sequoia. Same with the idle percentage, but it definitely bumps up until it's ready above 90% idle, from 33 seconds to 135. Same here, boot times go up 10 seconds from 23 to 33, and the wait time goes up from 5 to 17 seconds until you see the dog. So what does it mean? So if you have a higher spec Skylake 6th generation Mac, you can use Sequoia if you don't mind the waiting, because some speeds go up, some remain, some go down. It's a little bit indifferent. It definitely takes longer to get ready. But if you have like a mid or lower spec, I definitely recommend Sonoma. The last generation that I tested through all macOS versions was the 7th generation, and that was Kaby Lake. That was released in 2016, shortly prior 2017, and is in my iMac 2017 that I tested here. And here you can see the iMac is a regular desktop processor, not like a mobile version in the MacBooks and so on. So you can see here that the scores, for instance, a speedometer goes up in Safari if you install Sequoia. The idle percentage remains. The login time and the boot time increase a little bit. Login goes up from 10 to 16 seconds. But until it's ready, same here, Sequoia adds so much background tasks that the iMac needs, instead of 30 seconds, 110 until it's above 90% idle in the system overview. If you look at the scoring for ScoreMark, the overall drops a little bit in Sonoma and the responsiveness goes really down. The creativity scoring goes a little bit down. So with the Kaby Lake family, like my iMac 2017, depending on your spec and on your personal preferences, you can use either Sonoma or Sequoia if you don't mind the wait with booting up. Same is the MacBook Pro 2017 and the regular MacBook 2017. That is the only one where you can use Sequoia reasonably if you just wait a little bit until it's booted up. Afterwards, in 2017 and 2018, there were the 8th and 9th generation Coffee Lake that Apple still used in some of the MacBooks, like my MacBook Pro 2018. And then there was the 10th generation that was called Comet Lake, that was released 2019. And then obviously in 2020, Apple switched to Apple Silicon, to the M1 chip, like my Mac Mini that I have here. And I benchmarked this also for comparison. Just one info, as you can see, for macOS Sequoia, Apple drew the line after 2017. So all Macs older than 2017 were dropped officially from macOS Sequoia, and only the 8th, 9th, and 10th generation Intel chips were supported. And obviously, this really is shown in all benchmarks that all Macs before 2017 really have a hard time with macOS Sequoia with OpenCore. And just for a comparison, I did all the benchmarks also, starting with macOS Big Sur, without OpenCore obviously, up until macOS Tahoe on my base model Mac Mini M1 from 2020. And it's quite astonishing that it starts in 2020 with Big Sur, then it has Monterey, Ventura, Sonoma, Sequoia, and Tahoe. And we are all very excited if macOS 27 will still support M1 chips. We will see that in a few days. But here you can see that the M1 Apple Silicon, I had to change the scaling of my benchmarks. So you can see all the score mark went up until 900. For the M1, I changed the scale from 900 to 1800. So because the scoring was double than, for instance, my iMac 2017. And also the speedometer scoring was way higher, so I had to split that. And you can see here, Big Sur starts with 329 and it goes up straight to Tahoe with 558. So the benchmarks in Safari just increase with every new Safari version. It really looks that Sequoia was quite bad optimized for Apple Silicon, because in the score mark, nearly all scores in Sequoia are less than in Sonoma. But then comes Tahoe. all scores jump up a lot when you use macOS Tahoe. And so the only macOS I can recommend for Apple Silicon, and even if it's an 6-year-old base model M1 Mac Mini, is macOS Tahoe. Don't go or don't stay older. Now, just one more thing, as Apple always says, there are MacBook Airs 2018 and 2019 that are not officially supported by macOS Sequoia, because from Sonoma to Sequoia, these Mac models, there were the only 2 models that were dropped. But the problem is that these MacBook Air from 2018, 2019, they are Kaby Lake family, quite new, but they are still not supported by OpenCore legacy patcher since nearly 2 years because of the T2 security chip. OpenCore legacy patcher, the devs still were not able to handle the T2 security chip, and these were the first models that were dropped that have these T2 chips. And so here you have to stay with the latest official macOS, and that is Sonoma. So for you, it's easy. Just check out what your Mac's age is, what is the year of your Mac, and maybe try to find out if it's a low spec, a basic spec, or a high spec. And then you just say, okay, in this video, the MacBook Pro 2015, for instance, works fine with Ventura, but with Sequoia, it really gets slow. Maybe I stay with Ventura.